Good afternoon. Welcome to the Fourth Business Press webinar on what's become a very timely topic, cybersecurity. I'm Bob Francis, editor of the Fourth Business Press. We're glad you've joined us today. So I'm sure you know cybersecurity has been in the news for all the wrong reasons. Companies large and small are being impacted by these attacks. And I'm sure we all know someone who's run into this on the personal level and probably in their company as well. And today we have two great guests who can provide some advice and maybe even a few answers. We have Brett Leatherman, who is Supervisory Special Agent at the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Dallas, focuses on cybersecurity, and Michael Moore, who is founder and CEO of M3 Networks in Southlake. I'll let our two guests do a little introduction of themselves and what their mission is in the work world. Brett, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate you guys. Turn this down here a little bit. Appreciate you guys taking the time out to invite us here. My name is Brett Leatherman. I'm with the Dallas field office of the FBI. I'm one of the cyber supervisory special agents here. And any opportunity we get to engage our private sector partners is important for us. So thank you for the invite to talk today. The FBI's mission, really, we have kind of dual-fold mission set. We are both a law enforcement agency as well as a U.S. intelligence community agency. So we really look at leveraging both intel as well as law enforcement mission sets to really target, identify, attribute, and pursue cyber threat actors. We're one of many within the U.S. government engaged in that cyber fight. So under Presidential Policy Directive 41, PPD 41, the FBI serves as the lead agency for threat response, imposing risk and consequence on cyber adversaries, whether they're criminal or nation state. And we do that by leveraging our unique law enforcement and intelligence community authorities to impose that risk and consequence on adversaries looking to exploit both public and government networks as well as private sector networks to steal money and intellectual property or to cripple critical infrastructure. We work closely with DHS, who you'll see in this diagram as well. They're one of our partners under PPD 41, and DHS is the lead for asset response for both protecting and promoting remediation efforts post-breach. So they're really focused on the 16, I think it is, critical infrastructure sectors and helping to prevent attacks on those entities, as well as help remediating that. And then Office of Director of National Intelligence leads the effort for threat intelligence during a major event, sharing that threat intelligence between the threat response, the asset response, the U.S. government decision makers, and the private sector entities. Most importantly, we work together to preserve critical evidence for attribution while also helping victim organizations quickly identify, contain, and remediate cyber threats. And you'll see under our guiding principles under PPD 41 that we really are partnering together to help investigate and attribute as well as remediate and help the company get back on solid footing as it relates to cyber response. We kind of have a unique position in the FBI because of our dual authorities. We really look for those public-private partnerships. We are really good when it comes to our counterterrorism mission, our counterintelligence mission, our criminal investigative mission, and we are pretty self-sufficient in going after and disrupting terrorist organizations and criminal enterprises. When it comes to cyber, we have to partner regularly and often with private sector partners. You guys are under attack. Our private sector partners are under attack on a regular basis. You innovate, you hold intellectual property, you maintain PII, PHI, and sensitive information. And so we can't engage in this fight without you. Our criminal and national security cyber authorities, as well as our forward deployed workforce in 56 field offices across the country. We also have an international footprint, and all of this allows us to collect both technical and contextual information important for prevention, detection, remediation efforts. And at the end of the day, it's incumbent upon us to share that threat information but we can't do it effectively if our private sector partners don't share that intelligence with us. So it's important for us to really work together in this fight. And that's why opportunities like this, we really welcome. So I know there's a lot to talk about today. We're all equal players in the fight. Just as adversaries are partnering together to launch complex attacks against us, we have to partner together to raise our collective cyber defensive posture to protect our economy and our national security. So thanks for the invite to participate. I look forward to jumping into the discussion.
That's great. And I think we'll get lots of questions on that as well. Well, let's turn to Michael. And Michael, tell us a little bit about M3 Networks and how you got started in this industry and when you founded M3 Networks.
Sure. So I'll start with that. I founded M3 Networks in 2008. I worked a lot of different roles myself in the IT world. Started as a help desk guy, network engineer, all the way up to CIO of a Fort Worth company here locally. And I knew that there was really a big need for IT support and cybersecurity support. So that's what we do at M3 Networks. Is we're essentially an IT department for a small and mid-sized business. We're on the front lines every day answering help desk calls, implementing cybersecurity solutions, and trying to provide a high level of trusted service to those clients. One of the most important things is developing a level of trust with your clients that you can support, because ultimately they don't know what they don't know. I mean, we're getting attacks that happen against prospective clients all the time, and they don't know if we're a good provider or somebody else is a good provider, but they do need the help consistently. We've got a bunch of engineers in Southlake, Texas, and we partner with a lot of good resources throughout the country to provide some solutions. That's what we do at M3 Networks. Everything an IT department can do, that's what we do for the small and mid-sized businesses.
Yeah, I was about to ask what size businesses typically do you work with?
We typically start out at about 20 employees, and we typically go up to about 500 employees.
And tell me, as long as you've been in the business, what are the big changes you've seen over time and the types of threat you're seeing out there?
You know, a long time ago, it was simple ransomware, and that was all that was sent. And, you know, back in the day, people used what these things called script kiddies, basically uncoordinated attacks done by junior level people that didn't really know what they were doing. They were really just trying to have some fun. You know, it may not be your cup of tea, but a lot of people just tried to take down things to have a little fun. Now it's a gigantic industry, and there are well-coordinated corporations out there that are working hard to take money away from good people every day. So that's a huge difference. You know, we're talking in the last just 5-10 years, how things have gotten more and more complex and complicated, and how these organizations work together. I'm sure Brett could talk about that, but they didn't used to work together. So
it sounds like they've gotten a lot more sophisticated. So it requires a more sophisticated solution.
There's a lot of money in it. There's a lot of money in trying to take money away from people that you didn't earn.
That's kind of always been the case. It's just a different electronic way to do it.
Yeah.
Brett, it was interesting in your presentation. I wondered about how you, one of the questions I had from some people was, you know, I got hit by this attack, but, you know, do I call the local police? Who do I call when I get attacked like this? And I wondered if you partner with local agencies a lot in your investigations.
Yeah, so every FBI field office with a cyber squad has what we call a cyber task force, and it is comprised of state police officers, local police officers, as well as federal authorities to really bring all levels of law enforcement to bear against the threat. Our recommendation is if a company is hit with any kind of cyber incident, that they call the FBI cyber task force near them. So if you're in the greater DFW area, if you're in Fort Worth, right here in Dallas, you have a cyber team, 2 cyber teams actually ready to engage in the fight. Now, we don't have to open a federal case for every investigate or for every, incident that happens in private sector. And we hear concerns about that amongst private sector folks is, listen, we don't necessarily need you to open a federal case on this because we have a pretty good handle on it. But sharing that information with us helps us bring context to you as a victim, because we have the 56 field offices, because we do incident response 365 days a year. We have unique optics into attack vectors, infrastructure, tool sets that we can come back and amplify within your organization to help you in containing and remediation efforts. And we don't have to open a case on it, but we may be able to help. There are some state and local agencies who have cyber capabilities, but I would say that's few and far between. They're really focused on violent crime problems in responding in the communities. Increasingly, cyber adversaries are global adversaries, and it really goes outside of their jurisdiction and area of responsibility when it comes to pursuing those actors. Part of our job is to work with NSA, CIA, DHS. We have agents located in embassies around the globe just to work these kind of complex international matters. So we always encourage victims to reach out to the local FBI field office to start conversations about what it looks like post breach in getting a law enforcement response, whether it's a large law enforcement response or it's simply starting to enhance some of the intelligence that the private company needs.
And I'll sort of ask the same question I asked of Michael. Have you seen changes in the past few years in the type of attacks that you're seeing and the sophistication of them?
Tremendous changes. I mean, just during the pandemic alone, here in North Texas, and I can speak for all our field office partners, we've seen tremendous change in adversaries. And so I agree that early on we had a lot of these hacktivists and lower level cyber attackers, but what we've seen is this move from individual cyber adversaries, people trying to make an extra few dollars, to cyber criminal organizations and enterprises. And they function as large criminal organizations in order to increase, the money that they're able to get from corporations. I mean, ransomware alone, I know we'll get into that, but ransomware alone lately has become a pandemic. And a large part of that is because we're seeing ransom payments ranging from $4 million to $40 million. And when you can get $40 million for engaging in online cyber extortion, you're going to see additional high-tech criminals get into that endeavor as well. And that's what we see. We see highly technical folks teaming together to really target US-based corporations.
Yeah, I got to admit, 40 million is pretty profitable for essentially not doing a whole lot of work in some ways. So,
and I'll expand a little bit on one of the things that Brett said there is how they've become organizations. One of the other things that used to happen is they weren't working together. Now you can sort of rent your own hackers. There are entire botnets and the like that you can buy time on so that you can carry out a coordinated attack.
I hate to say it, they sound like pretty good businessmen. That's interesting. I have a question here, or a suggestion. It's probably a good one we should put in our chat here. It says, is there a site to contact to report an incident? Email, website, phone, and we'll get that up on our chat here. Or if y'all have a suggestion,
Yeah,
you want to give live.
Yeah, from our standpoint. So, if you go to FBI.gov, if you're looking to contact law enforcement, FBI.gov, go to About Us, and you should be able to look up the FBI field offices and what areas of the country they cover. From there, you'll see a contact number, and you can call the FBI field office and ask for the cybercrime team, and then you'll be routed to them. We do have the Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3.gov, which is really a good place to go if you have a business email compromise, a certain kind of social engineering fraud that we see a lot of lately. If you have a ransomware incident, you can report it there, ic3.gov, but we highly recommend you reach out directly to us. Talk to one of the cyber team members, one of the agents or supervisors, to engage them. That way we have that conversation. Time matters when it comes to cyber incidents. And if you're looking to involve law enforcement, we don't want that to happen 2 weeks from now. If you're hit with a major compromise, an APT actor, a ransomware event, we want you to reach out directly, and we want you to do that early.
Michael, I wonder if you might sort of walk through what, once you get a call from someone who's been attacked or thinks they've been attacked, what's your process for engaging with a company or a client?
Well, I mean, it differs a lot in range and severity, whether it's a simple forwarding of a spam email. I think this is suspicious. And that's important for us. Is we want our clients to contact us about everything. We want them to become very untrusting of the things that they're seeing. You know, we don't want them to click, you know, every credit card offer that comes in. And you know, frankly, with the pandemic last year, people were getting a lot of phishing emails that said, here's the latest news on the pandemic. You know, when we had the Dallas shooting, that people were getting a lot of phishing events saying, you know, there's another shooting right outside your window. You click this to find out more, all that kind of stuff. To a more severe attack, like a ransomware event where they've literally locked down the network and taking everything hostage. You know, with that, a real keen first step for us is to understand what the attack vector is, and to understand if they still have access to the network. And we want to remove that access. In some cases, that means taking away the connection to the internet, which means that business is down. A really, really important thing is to have a backup and disaster recovery plan, especially one that you can rewind in time, because folks at the FBI don't want you to delete what has happened because they want to see what's happened. But at least if we can rewind in time and take away the event rather than just deal with the event, that sure helps us out a lot.
Okay. I have a question here. Brett, can you discuss the apprehension of a company in reporting a ransomware and the ability to maintain their brand integrity? Probably talking also a little bit about basically keeping their anonymity if they report something, I think.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's been a hesitancy among some organizations to report ransomware and other events to law enforcement because they're concerned that either law enforcement is going to go to the regulators if they're a regulated entity, or it's going to ultimately end up in a disclosure that's going to hurt the brand. And what I would say is, in the FBI, we operate as a law enforcement agency under the victim rights model. Our goal is not to out anybody or to further victimize anybody. If you've been hit by a cyber event, those in the news media, those in other corporations may vilify you as an organization. We won't do that in the FBI. I think going back to the Sony Pictures destructive malware attack, we did a very good job there at displaying how the FBI treats a corporation as a victim. If you look at the president of Sony Pictures at the time, he was an advocate of bringing the FBI in after the event happened because of that victim mentality. What I would also say is I would encourage organizations to review a Treasury Department memo from October 1 related to potential sanctions against ransomware payments. The reason we're in the situation we're in today with ransomware being a pandemic is directly related to the paying of ransoms. And it's become a lucrative environment where folks rely on their cyber insurance company when they're breached and to pay these ransoms. And it creates this environment where cyber criminals are benefiting tremendously to the detriment of the US economy. And so what Treasury Department has said is if from October 1, 2020 forward, if you pay a ransom to a designated wallet, a designated individual or criminal group, a designated region in some cases, you can be held liable through OFAC regulations. You as an organization, your principals, if you make a payment, can be held civilly liable, potentially criminally liable. The insurance company that's making the payment and anybody facilitating that ransom payment. The goal is not to re-victimize folks, but it is to say this is becoming a national security problem because it's impacting our economy. And as you saw in the last few weeks with Colonial Pipeline, it's also impacting kinetic events, our ability in some cases to get gasoline, right? So if we continue down this path, we're going to continue into this area where cyber criminals are going to thrive. And if healthcare systems are shut down, last year we saw the first death, we believe, associated with the ransomware event in Germany when a hospital was shut down due to ransomware and they had to turn patients away. And a female had to go 40 minutes north to a hospital for cardiac issues and died en route. So we're starting to see these kinetic events, these things that impact public health. We're going to continue to see an impact on the economy. And so I would say in that Treasury memo, if you report a ransomware incident rapidly to law enforcement and you work with them on a regular basis throughout that ransom event, if you decide to pay the ransom, your cooperation with U.S. law enforcement is going to be seen as a mitigating factor in paying the ransom. So it reduces your risk in a sense.
Yeah, we should get a link to that memo as well, if that's possible. That'd be great. Yeah, you mentioned the Colonial Pipeline, and yeah, you're right. You can look at this as, oh, this is all just happening in cyberspace. It's not really impacting anyone's lives, but that's certainly the case if you go to the gas pump, particularly in the northeast part of the country at the moment. I wonder if either of you could comment a little on that incident and anything you think that shows that's sort of either typical or maybe points to what the new state of cyber attacks might be from that attack. Brett, you want to?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. So
Sure.
Number one, the actors are looking for an emotional response. If they attack a healthcare institution, there's a propensity for the public to have an emotional response. Like if you're going to turn patients away because the data within your systems are fully encrypted, you're probably going to be inclined to pay a ransom sooner rather than later. There's an emotional response there. They've now seen a significant emotional response to what happens if you go after a pipeline company and you don't even impact the operational technology side of the company, you impact the business side of the company. They've now seen that the result of that is a lot of public dialogue about ransomware and the potential payment of significant ransoms. So I think there's an emotional component to this, and that's why we continue to see and may continue to see critical infrastructure targeted. And folks do rely on that to get that rapid and quick payment from organizations. They to an extent they breed on fear within organizations that they can't get their data back or they can't unlock their systems quick enough. And there are steps that organizations could take and should take today. They were put out by the ransomware task force. The FBI has put out a lot of ransomware guidance, and so have our partners at CISA and U.S. Secret Service about how to better protect your environments. And what I would say is you have to have a better idea of your network topology and your risk management strategy than what the bad guy is going to get if they get into your network. And that's what we see. We see bad guys getting into networks, and instead of pulling the trigger right away, they sit in that network for days, weeks, sometimes months, and they get to know the network really well. And unfortunately, in some cases, better than the network administrators, so that they are able to fully encrypt it. And we have to do a better job at segregating, de-escalating privilege, taking really good, sound technical and risk management steps to reduce the risk. But we also have to get better at helping our executives understand that cyber risk is business risk. this is not just a technical problem. This is a problem from the boardroom to the executive level. They need to start to embrace a knowledge of what's happening, how to mitigate that risk, and they have to have those conversations with their colleagues, their peers, as well as their subordinates, and how to better protect their organization.
I'm assuming in that Colonial Pipeline case that because they're a critical infrastructure, that they reached out to federal officials, law enforcement officials, fairly quickly on this. But say a bank that happens to, they're not a critical infrastructure. They might not immediately reach out to a law enforcement official with something like this. Is that basically what you're saying?
Technically, financial institutions fall within a sector of critical infrastructure.
Oh, okay.
But there is a voluntary nexus to whether they want to do that or not. They, just like Colonial Pipeline is somewhat obligated to work with the Department of Energy when it comes to these type of attacks. They are not necessarily obligated to engage the FBI. Same with financial institutions. They have obligations within the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department, but they don't necessarily have obligations to reach out right away to law enforcement. And even if you do, some organizations will reach out, but they don't regularly or quickly share information that would help us with attribution, investigation, and remediation. So there may be certain obligations. There are no obligations on the part of private sector, other than they need to think about that risk associated with not contacting law enforcement. What is the risk of contacting law enforcement, right? If we're not going to report to regulators, if we're going to treat you as a victim, there's not much risk in reporting to law enforcement. From our perspective, there's a lot of benefit in doing that.
And the other thing I thought I heard you say was it sounded like the people that did this cyber attack, it sounded like you were saying that maybe they were looking for some notoriety in this as well. Is that accurate?
I don't know that I can comment on that part of it, notoriety, but I would say that in general, the groups associated with the major strains, so Nikibi, Emotet, a lot of the major strains of ransomware, they want you to know who they are, because if you are hit with ransomware, they want you to know that they have a reputation, that they are serious, and that you need to pay them. And so they do tend to develop, a cult following in the press sometimes.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well. Michael, do you have some comments on that attack, that incident?
Not specifically that incident. We work a lot with small businesses and mid-sized businesses, but what I would say is, to Brett's point about it's a business risk, it's not just an unknown risk. The challenge is, so many people say this is a big investment to take care of the network, the cybersecurity, the IT support, network administration. And, whatever the expense is on the preventive side, there typically is an emotional response in that regard of, I don't want to spend this money. I don't want to have to protect this in that way. And people tend to think of it as just, I'm investing in technology. I'm investing in tools and antivirus and backups and all that kind of stuff. And, we tend to think of it as, you're investing in protecting the money and the reputation that you already have. So what does it cost to protect the entirety of your company? And if all the money in your bank account was gone and you couldn't pay payroll tomorrow, what kind of an impact would that have on you? And at that point, yeah, you're going to get a really significant, I'd like to invest in this area. And to Brett's point about the hacker groups looking for an emotional response, a company with more money is going to solicit a higher ransom. A company that last year, I believe it was in Sweden, there was a hotel where they actually locked all the doors in the hotel and put a high enough ransom in there that it actually came in with axes and knocked down a lot of the doors to get people out of the hotels. I mean, that stuff is crazy.
Yeah, I would. Well, I don't know if I don't know if I'd want to be on either side of that door. Yeah, that's right.
Right.
I'll just spend a few more minutes on this Colonial Pipeline, but one of the things was that the company or its board uh, ended up paying a ransom. I just wonder if what you're seeing out there in terms of a company or a board having a policy on paying ransom, and uh, what kind of guidance do they have in doing something like that?
Every company is different. That's what I'd tell you is every single company out there is very different on how they would handle that. Um, it's so many times people don't have a lot of guidance, and they don't have any playbook for what should we do if this happens. They think it's a figment of our imagination. It's never going to happen, right? So when it does happen, there's a panic move to pay a ransom or not pay a ransom based on an emotional decision, not based on logic or what has actually been the attack vector, how much are we affected, those kind of things. Brett, would you say the same thing?
Yeah, I think, where larger corporations do have, somewhat of an incident response plan in place. A lot of corporations, large to small, do not have an incident response plan in place. And even if they do, they don't include ransomware in that risk calculus. That's our experience, is that we go in sometimes post ransom event, and folks have not determined whether they will or will not pay a ransom, how they'll facilitate payment of a ransom if they're going to do it. And if they're not, how they're going to reconstitute from backup. So, that's a decision that has to be made early on. There are a lot of cyber events that post breach, you can start to recover over time by implementing good detection capabilities and containment capabilities. Ransomware is not one of them. Like, you either prevent them up front, or as soon as you're breached and the ransom hits, you're in incident response going forward. And if you're not prepared for that, you're going to have a big problem. When it comes to payments, a lot of folks rely on their cyber insurance right now. We just saw in France, one of the major cyber insurance providers saying this is no longer a sustainable insurance model for us. And so we're going to continue to cover folks for cyber insurance. We are no longer going to cover payment of ransoms. And so the question now becomes, will other insurers start to follow that same model? Because it is becoming, I would imagine, I'm not an insurance guy, but seems to be becoming unsustainable for insurance companies to pay ransom after ransom, sometimes multiple ransoms for the same customer. So if that insurance goes away, it's going to an extent, start to really put the onus on corporations to either get their act together pre-ransomware event and start to plan, prepare, and practice for those events, or find out afterwards their insurance doesn't pay for it and come up with a different solution.
Yeah, it's like having a bunch of car wrecks and your car insurance going up until they eventually don't cover you. Yeah, I can see that. Michael?
Prevention's the only medicine, right? And really what happens when you do get yourself into some sort of ransomware trouble, the like, you've got your name on a list as a future participant in a future attack. Think of it like when you get spam mail that you may have signed up for at your house, and then all of a sudden you start getting spam mail from so many different other folks, and you're like, how am I getting all this crap mail? That's all these hacker groups are doing, is they're sharing information such that they know, hey, this network is vulnerable. They're a willing payer, they're a willing participant, and they don't know how to protect themselves in the future. And so many times, just even a really basic thing, companies will leave really basic ports open in a firewall out of pure convenience. Just say, I want to access my network in this way because it's convenient. And frankly, here's convenience, here's security. They're on two sides of the equation. And so you have to make a choice. Am I going to put some barriers in place to protect the company? Or am I going to leave these really convenient openings for a hacker to get in and take us over? That's your choice.
what's convenient for you is convenient for the adversary, right? So if it's convenient for you to get into your network a certain way, it's going to be convenient for the adversary to do the same. So I would kind of echo that. I would say if you have RDP, like that's an area we see a lot of exploitation and ransomware deployment, is folks who are employing RDP with, remote desktop access, basically without strong authentication, or utilizing encrypted platforms to connect, like VPNs with multi-factor authentication to connect remotely. We also see a lot of unpatched vulnerabilities. So if you're a risk manager and you don't have a vulnerability management program in place, you're a future victim, and you're a near future victim, I would say. You've really got to look at what devices do we have on our network, and how do we patch them when vulnerabilities are discovered on a regular basis. If you go to CISA's website, CISA, for anybody, I would encourage you to check there every day. Like, that's at the top of my reading list. FBI alerts, NSA alerts, DHS alerts all get, largely published to the CISA cyber alerts. And if you're there, you're going to see a lot of vulnerabilities that are being exploited by cyber actors, because they don't want to deploy their most sophisticated tools against organizations here when they can take the path of least resistance, which is going after vulnerabilities. And what is really tough for a CISO to do post breach is find out that a vulnerability was exploited. We're paying a $4 to $6 million ransom, and that vulnerability was patched 2 years ago, and we didn't apply the patch to the system. That's a tough conversation to have with your executive leadership. So take a look at those alerts and make sure you're patching those vulnerabilities.
I'll give one more example there, because we talked about remote desktop protocol and those types of things. So many times, everybody in the company will have a complex password and multi-factor authentication, except, let's just say the CEO, and the CEO say, I've had the same password for a dozen years. I'm not changing it. I don't care about the cybersecurity stuff. And so you've got the person with the most access, the most authority, having a password that's the easiest hack in the entire organization. So there's a lot of cases when somebody makes a suggestion of, this is an area we need to lock down, you really need to take that seriously in whatever way you take something seriously. Whether it's you've got a friend you can bounce that idea off of that works in IT security, or you've got a company you work with, but you really have to take each one of those things very seriously, because we see that every day. Somebody will call in and say, our company was hacked. We'll take a look at it really quick. The CEO's got a password that's password 123. They've got port 3389 or the RDP port open. And it's like, my 9-year-old could get into this network. This is not really a complicated attack. And so that's what a lot of folks think. They think this is a really complicated attack. They went after us, they target us, maybe, but in many cases, the hacker group is just broadcasting across networks to see who's got their network unpatched, completely vulnerable. And then it's like fishing. This is in the area where I can catch the fish. I'm going to go to that part of the lake. I don't have to do any work in that part of the lake. I just have to find the right guide.
So in the past year with the pandemic, a lot of people are working from home. Did you see a big increase in people coming in that way through these sort of desktops that are sitting in people's houses, like mine is now?
Well, funny enough, there was more panic with the pandemic than just the actual pandemic itself. We saw people saying, we had 25 computers in the office and we took them all home. We plugged in the copier at home, lots of just crazy stuff. And so when asking these questions of what's plugged in, what's connected, what's going on, we talked a little bit about networks earlier, the topology of network. You've literally taken something that's been designed in a specific way and redesigned it 1,000 different ways. So yes, is the short answer. The attacks went up in the first just few weeks of the pandemic, over 400% is what we saw. And in so many cases, it was those convenient attacks.
Yeah, we did too. I mean, the pandemic was, it forced folks within a week's time to figure out how we're going to start enabling our workforce to work from home, to work remotely. And because business fails if we don't have our workforce doing what they need to be doing, but at the same time, we can't have them physically in the building. So organizations who did not have remote work policies in place or had limited remote work policy in place quickly had to deploy, hundreds, if not thousands of, endpoints remotely. And how do you do that when there's a run on laptop computers? And this is what we saw. And you couldn't buy laptop computers for your organization. And so what happened? They started allowing employees to connect remotely using their own devices with all kinds of different, operating systems and services running. So they have dirty environments connecting to their environment, which they had to quickly allow access to. And a lot of times what we saw was folks just quickly made the access happen so business could occur without putting safeguards in place, logical physical safeguards in place, authentication safeguards in place for that connectivity. And that allowed a lot of bad actors to get in there. And that's part of the reason we see ransomware today being what it is, business email compromise being what it is, SolarWinds, the exploitation of SolarWinds. SolarWinds, the initial exploit happened before the pandemic, but it was really during the pandemic when you had a lot of your system admins out of the office that the adversary started to escalate privilege and move laterally throughout this really complex supply chain breach, one of the most complex espionage campaigns we've ever seen from a state-sponsored adversary. So it really allowed us to not only prevent folks from getting in, but because our network admins and our cybersecurity personnel were remote, it really promoted this inability to detect the adversary while they were in the network. So, what could have been stopped early to stop the hemorrhaging was not stopped early, and that caused a huge problem. Hafnium, the exploitation of on-premises Microsoft Exchange servers, the exploitation of Office 365 environments. It's one after another. We talked about the colonial pipeline. One after another, we continually saw this inability to kind of defend against these sophisticated adversaries because in part of these remote work environments.
Well, I'll say one more thing about that. The other expansion that a lot of folks didn't think about is the expansion of things like Netflix has grown tremendously. Disney Plus has grown tremendously. You have kids, doing school at home, signing up for gobs and gobs of online services. And what's really interesting is folks would use the same password at work on their corporate network, same password at LinkedIn, same password on Netflix, same password at all these places. And then one of these organizations would get breached. So now you've got the same password used in one place that's the same password as your network password at the office or your Office 365 email password. And so now you've got the password to access the network. So you can really easily go see whether or not you've got your credentials on the dark web on a lot of different sites, including the credit bureau sites, like Experian and the like. But if you search your email address and you see your exact password being used in all these places and it's on the dark web, that's another good attack vector for your particular company. You should use a unique password every single place you go. Everybody knows that's a pain in the ass, right? But it is, the more, convenient it is, the more convenient it is for that hacker.
Yeah, one of the questions I got beforehand was, was how important really is it to change passwords and the strength of your password? It sounds like you're saying it's very important.
Well, it's sort of like asking a cardiologist how important is it to get this blood pressure down, or how important is it to exercise? Well, it's really important after you have a heart attack, right? It becomes very important to you. But the cardiologist in that example sees that it's important all the time, right? Because we're building up to that place to where we're going to get ourselves in trouble in the future. All of the efforts to be preventive with a network are best efforts, right? You could put in 30 plus layers of cybersecurity to make it extremely difficult to get into that network. But it only takes one issue, one user saying, hey boss, I saw the email come in that you wanted my password, so I entered it on this online form, or I got this text earlier today that said you needed something, so I went ahead and gave these folks that I don't know the credentials to the network. All those layers of security were really helpful until you gave your password away to the network. So every layer is important.
I'm not sure if it's accurate or not, because I saw some differing opinions on it, but I did hear originally that SolarWinds hack, which was pretty big one, was partially caused by a intern who used a very simple password, a pass123 type password. So it's not just people that you're working in your organization there, and particularly in journalism here, we use a lot of freelancers too. So
Right.
you're going to have people that may not be full-time employees also working on your system. So
Right.
I know on the SolarWinds breach, I think what you're talking about is on one of the development servers. It was an intern's credentials for SolarWinds 123, which I can tell you right now, if I launched a Linux virtual machine and one of the password crackers we use, it's not going to take too long to come up
No.
with to crack a password like that. So, but a couple things. So first of all, we shouldn't be allowing interns to really drive that narrative that it was because of an intern that they compromised one of the most complex events we've seen. That was a risk management problem, right? So that was how we protect our environment, even when we allow interns to have access to development servers. I'm not saying it's wrong not to give them access, but how do we protect them, right? And so even a complex password is you can come up with the best password in the world. It can be 30 characters long, completely unmemorable. You can't memorize it. But at the end of the day, the adversary is really, really good at social engineering and credential theft. And so you can have the best password and they can socially engineer that out of you, or they can launch a keylogger or something in the environment and capture it. And the only way to mitigate a threat like that is multi-factor authentication. And that is becoming a key way to prevent adversaries from getting in. If you're looking for one of the best ways to defend your networks against credential theft, that is it. And I started using multi-factor authentication, 6 years ago on what was important to me, my fantasy football team. And so if that's what I'm doing there, I hope, businesses are looking at how they employ it in their own environment.
Yeah, they wouldn't want, you wouldn't want your winning record to get how you did that to get out. A pretty good, it's kind of a general question we've talked a little bit about, but, and Michael, you might want to talk about this one. How can small businesses protect themselves against attacks when they have limited funds for security?
Limited funds is different to everybody, right? But it's really that same question from before is, how much do you want to protect the money and how much do you want to protect the business? So, it starts with a really simple conversation with somebody who knows what they're doing. You wouldn't perform surgery on yourself. You'd go to a surgeon. So go to somebody who knows what they're doing in this area. And then number two, have a process for what you're doing. If you're given, and as an example, a process for auditing your network, follow that process. So many times people get really lazy. And these processes are simple. It's like, I've got a landscaper that does our lawn, right? But I could just as easily mow the lawn myself. It's not that complicated. If one of the processes in there is make sure that we have complex passwords, we can't just say, nah, we just don't do that here. If one of the next things is have two-factor authentication, we can't just say we can't do that here. We suggest to have your firewall, as an example, replaced every 4 years because it's a perishable item. But just because it got replaced doesn't mean that it's up to date. So one of the other things in that process is to make sure the firewall is up to date. There's only so many processes that you need to follow, but you need to follow them. Somebody has to be looking after that and following that. To the example of the firewall there, It doesn't matter that you've got a brand new firewall. The day you put it into place is the day that it's just like spoiled milk in the fridge. It needs to be constantly updated. Somebody has to look after it, whether that's somebody in-house, somebody outsourced, but these processes have to be followed to the T.
Yeah, I would say you have to walk before you can run, right? So I've seen organizations spend millions of dollars on cybersecurity, most of the time to be circumvented by some fundamental, step that they didn't take. And so you got to really ensure the basics are under your belt first. Like we talked about patch management, authentication and multi-factor authentication, de-escalating privilege, like not allowing the CEO or network admins to operate all the time in a privileged account. Instead, use your admin account when you need to. And then when you're surfing email, surfing the web, utilizing a standard user account. Just basic cyber hygiene. I would encourage any small business to start by looking at the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so those are really identifying the basics, the fundamentals. NIST 800, NIST cybersecurity framework are the ways to start looking through those documents, figuring out what do we need to do to start protecting our environment, and which things do we need to focus on first, given what our topology and our risk management framework looks like. Security through obscurity is no security at all. If you believe that I'm too small to be compromised, you're wrong, because there are automated tools to find vulnerabilities in your network, and the adversary is regularly scanning for those vulnerabilities. So, starting to leverage those risk management frameworks and developing an incident response plan is important. Like, what are we going to do if we identify a breach? Who are we going to involve? Is it going to be inside or outside legal counsel? Are we going to engage law enforcement? Are we going to engage a third party remediation firm? And how do we ensure that on day one, we are ready to go forward instead of waiting a week, to figure out who we're going to bring in and help us out? Because the adversary, the longer they're in their network, the longer they can establish a foothold, the longer they can increase privilege within the environment and move laterally, it's going to be a lot bigger problem. So really looking at those fundamentals up front are really important.
And the last thing I'd say about that is how do you check the people that are doing this for you? One of the questions we ask all the time is, who do you use for IT support, IT security? And the answer is typically, we got a guy, we trust him, he's my brother-in-law, whatever it is. And the question is always, what report shows you what is being done, how it's being done, and how do you know that you're safe? And if the answer is, well, I don't really check it, it's sort of like saying, we've got an accountant, but we never receive the money. She does a really good job of entering all the bills, but she never sends them out and we never receive the money. Great. Seems like she's doing a really good job of sitting at a desk and entering bills, but there's a functional task that needs to be performed here. The outcome of that accounts payable procedure or that accounts receivable procedure is to receive the money. It's not just do stuff in a vacuum. So have somebody outside your organization check this stuff. Many organizations are offering, ours included, free network assessments. Just take a look at the data. You don't have to do anything with it that yourself, but you need somebody to do something about it, whether that be an outside IT provider, in-sourced, whatever it is, but you need to have it checked.
Well, we've got just a few minutes left here. I wondered if y'all had some final thoughts for businesses out there and what you think we're going to see coming in the future. Michael, you want to start?
Well, I'm not going to predict the future, and technology and all that kind of fun stuff, because I'd be wrong. There's so many things coming down the line. The future is faster than you think, but these things are not getting better; they're getting worse. So to put your head in the sand, or I even had a guy on a webinar once say, my data is not that important, I'll just shut down my entire company. Well, how does your wife feel about you shutting down your entire company? That's just not a good solution, right? So all of these attacks are getting worse. the complexity of the attacks are getting worse. The complexity of what you need to do to take care of it is getting more and more difficult. But it's also uber convenient to hire a good provider. 15, 20 years ago, there weren't that many providers out there, and there weren't that many good ones for sure. There's a lot of good providers out there who can really help you with this stuff and just want to take care of these businesses.
Yeah, from my standpoint, I would say that awareness is key by the board, by the executives down, in really setting that tone for the rest of the organization that cybersecurity is everybody's responsibility. It's not just our IT department's responsibility. Everybody who has a password to this system has a role. And if you work in accounting, physical security, or elsewhere, it's really important that you understand that role, that you're educated, and sometimes that you're tested on your cybersecurity. The other thing I would say is partnerships are incredibly important in this world. Like I said at the beginning, adversaries are partnering together. We have to do the same. So the FBI has a program called InfraGard, INFRAGARD.org, which is a public-private sector partnership to help share threat intelligence and some of what we see in public sector or law enforcement work with those private sector partners. You also get access to an InfraGard portal where we share some of our threat intelligence. We would encourage you to engage in that. If you're in a critical infrastructure sector, like financial services, there's FS-ISAC, the DHS-sponsored ISACs are an important part of threat intel and sharing. I would encourage you to look at those. Healthcare, you have NHISAC. Energy sector, you have EI-ISAC. Even in government, you have your own ISAC. So I would encourage folks to look at the DHS ISACs and look to partner with your peers and colleagues in private sector and public sector, as well as those awareness campaigns are vitally important. And finally, look at CISA.gov and FBI.gov. We regularly put threat intelligence out there that helps sensitize you to new and emerging threats and ways to protect yourselves, your data, your stakeholders, and ultimately the U.S. economy as a result of that.
Yeah, thanks. I'd say the big thing I've learned from this, from having you on here, Brett, is just how much the FBI, I don't usually think of the FBI as a partnership organization, but obviously you guys are doing that. So I think that's great. And that's very good for business, for our customers to understand that. So thank you a lot. If we were in a live audience, I'd have the audience stand up and cheer, but I thought y'all did a great job, some really interesting stuff. And we really appreciate you joining us today.